She thought she was just another ambitious executive, until a secret inheritance made her the majority heir to a billion-dollar empire, and the target of those sworn to protect it. Now, with betrayal on every side and the weight of legacy on her shoulders, Danielle Rivers must fight not just to claim her place, but to survive it. Danielle Rivers stood at the edge of the gleaming conference room, her heart thumping like a war drum beneath her crisp blazer. The skyline of Chicago painted a majestic backdrop behind her, but her eyes were fixed on the long mahogany table where the board of directors from Maxwell Innovations sat. They were waiting, expectant, calculating. This wasn't just another presentation. This was the pitch that could elevate her to executive vice president. She took a deep breath. Her palms were damp despite the cool air conditioning humming through the ceiling vents. As the company's lead strategy consultant, Danielle had poured 6 grueling months into developing the Polaris Initiative, a visionary model aimed at repositioning Maxwell as the forerunner in sustainable tech integration. "Good morning, everyone," Danielle began, clicking the remote to cue her presentation. What followed was a masterclass in strategy, eloquence, and innovation. Danielle wove numbers into narratives, turning projections into compelling possibilities. She noticed approving nods from 2 board members. Even Henry Maxwell, the stoic founder, leaned forward, intrigued. When she finished, a hush lingered in the room. Danielle held her breath. Then, applause. Relief and pride surged through her. She'd nailed it. Every sleepless night, every weekend spent refining the financial models instead of relaxing with friends, had led to this moment. As people filtered out of the room, Henry Maxwell himself approached her. "Well done, Danielle. Impressive." "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. I believe this could be a turning point for our company." He smiled faintly. "Let's see how the vote goes tomorrow. I have a feeling you'll be pleased." Danielle floated back to her office, elated. That evening, she stopped by the design floor to check in on the Polaris branding team. There, she ran into Lucas Haynes, the newly hired senior advisor to the CEO. Lucas had joined just 3 months ago, Harvard MBA, all charm and sharp suits, but Danielle had always found something rehearsed about his friendliness. "Impressive show today," he said, sipping his espresso. "Thanks. It's been a long road." Lucas leaned against the wall, a smirk playing on his lips. "Let's hope the right people get the credit." Danielle narrowed her eyes slightly. "The team will. They've earned it." He nodded slowly, saying nothing more. But something in his tone itched in the back of her mind. The next morning, she arrived early, nerves buzzing with anticipation. The board was to convene again for the final decision. Her name was on the shortlist for promotion. Everyone knew it. Everyone except Danielle had already assumed she'd be chosen. She waited in her office, pretending to work until her assistant poked her head in. "They're ready in the boardroom." Danielle walked down the hall, heels clicking like a metronome of destiny. As she stepped in, the energy felt different. Henry Maxwell stood at the head of the table, flanked by the CEO, Mark Landon, and, surprisingly, Lucas. "Thank you for joining us, Danielle," Henry began, his expression unreadable. "We'd like to introduce our new Executive Vice President of Strategic Growth, Lucas Haynes." The words slapped her like cold water. She blinked. Once, twice. Lucas stepped forward, feigning modesty. "I'm honored. I'll be building upon the impressive foundation Danielle has laid." Danielle's heart sank. Her ears rang. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Henry continued. "Your work on the Polaris Initiative was instrumental. We hope you'll continue contributing to its success." Contributing? She had built it. Numb, she left the room as polite applause echoed behind her. That night, Danielle sat alone in her apartment. Her untouched dinner sat cold on the table. The city lights sparkled beyond her window, indifferent to her devastation. She opened her laptop, replaying the recording of her pitch, the one she had saved as a personal milestone. But something caught her attention. Lucas, in the background. His eyes were tracking every slide, his phone angled ever so slightly. She froze the frame. He had recorded her presentation. Her breath caught. The betrayal wasn't just corporate. It was calculated, planned. Her mind began to spin not with grief, but with purpose. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Danielle Rivers walked through the halls of Maxwell Innovations with a sense of quiet victory. Lucas was gone. Officially on leave, but everyone knew the truth. The man who had stolen her promotion, weaponized her loyalty, and nearly derailed her career was no longer a threat. Yet beneath the polished surface of her calm, Danielle felt a storm brewing, because the real enemy, the one who pulled the strings from the shadows, was still in the building: Henry Maxwell. As the founder and patriarch of the company, Henry had always been a distant figure, more myth than man. He appeared occasionally at major launches or investor calls, but rarely spoke to staff outside the C-suite. Danielle had only met him in passing before her recent rise. But now that she occupied a more prominent seat at the table, she was beginning to see just how much influence he still wielded. Danielle's instincts told her that Lucas had been just a pawn. Someone had backed him, protected him, and eventually discarded him when the backlash got too hot. And that someone had to be Henry. Her suspicions were confirmed during a conversation with Rachel Kim, the company's head of HR. They met in the privacy of Rachel's office. Behind soundproof glass and muted lighting, Rachel tapped a folder on her desk. Lucas's file. There were red flags going back years: poor team evaluations, financial irregularities, and even a complaint from a vendor. But each time, the reports were overridden by executive privilege. Danielle leaned forward. Whose? Rachel hesitated, then whispered, Henry's. It was worse than she thought. Lucas hadn't just been protected. He had been groomed, positioned, given carte blanche because someone believed he was the future of Maxwell Innovations. And now that he was gone, Danielle realized she might be next. In the weeks that followed, Danielle received cryptic emails from an anonymous sender. At first, she dismissed them as noise. But then one message changed everything. You're not just fighting for a title, you're fighting for what's already yours. Attached was a photograph, a grainy scan of an old document. Danielle zoomed in, heart pounding. It was a birth certificate, hers. But the father's name wasn't blank. It read, Henry Charles Maxwell. Danielle froze, the world tilted. Her mother had never spoken of her father, had raised Danielle alone, working 2 jobs and barely making ends meet. She died when Danielle was 10, leaving behind boxes of books and old photographs, but no answers. And now, suddenly, the man who had built one of the most powerful tech companies in the world, the man who had watched Danielle rise through the ranks without ever acknowledging her, was listed as her biological father. She spent days diving into old archives, calling former employees, and even reaching out to a private investigator. Piece by piece, the story formed. Elaine Rivers, her mother, had worked as Henry's executive assistant in the early 90s. They'd had a brief relationship. When Elaine became pregnant, Henry had offered her a settlement, quiet, off the books. She had refused. She left the company, changed cities, raised her daughter in silence. Danielle's rise through Maxwell Innovations hadn't been fate. It had been gravity. She had been pulled back into the orbit of her father's empire, unknowingly chasing a legacy that was already hers. And now, someone wanted her to know the truth. She confronted Henry in his office. No press, no board members, just the two of them. He stared at the document in her hands, silent. Finally, he spoke. I always knew this day might come. Why didn't you tell me? Danielle asked. Because I didn't want a scandal, or distractions, and because I wasn't ready to face what I gave up. Danielle's voice trembled. You gave up on me. Henry looked away. Your mother wanted to protect you. I let her. I thought it was the right thing. It wasn't. They sat in silence. Decades of lies and omissions are thick in the air. Henry finally said, You have a decision to make. You can burn this company to the ground in pursuit of vengeance, or you can take what's yours and lead it into the future. Danielle didn't respond, because she didn't yet know which she would choose. Later that week, Danielle received another envelope, this one from a law firm she'd never heard of. Inside were trust documents. Elaine Rivers had been granted a silent equity stake in Maxwell Innovations, one set to transfer to her daughter upon her death. Danielle now owns 48% of the company. It had always been hers. She wasn't an imposter. She was the rightful heir, and the board was about to find out. Danielle Rivers stood before the tall glass windows of her corner office, looking out over the city skyline. The weight of the past week settled like a storm on her shoulders. The revelation of her parentage, the confrontation with Henry Maxwell, the silent stake her mother had held all these years. Every piece of the puzzle she had never known she was solving now sat neatly aligned. And still, the final picture remained unclear. She was the heir, but what did that mean in a kingdom ruled by shadows? The boardroom would be her battleground. The emergency board meeting was set for Monday morning. Danielle prepared obsessively, reviewing shareholder agreements, corporate bylaws, and internal memos. Rachel Kim, her trusted HR ally, helped quietly from the sidelines, supplying her with a dossier of board members' allegiances, histories, and vulnerabilities. Trust in this war was as rare as loyalty. Danielle's legal team had confirmed her controlling interest. Technically, with 48%, she didn't hold majority control, but with just a few swayed votes from the board, she could tip the balance. Especially if she exposed the truth. She had considered keeping it all quiet, leveraging her new stake behind closed doors. But the thought of continuing in silence, under the long shadow of Henry's betrayal, was unbearable. Danielle wasn't just reclaiming her legacy, she was rewriting the narrative. On Monday morning, the boardroom buzzed with unease. The directors, a mix of seasoned veterans and newer faces, sat stiffly as Danielle entered, flanked by her attorney, and Rachel. Henry Maxwell was already seated at the head of the table, looking weary but composed. He offered her a small nod. It was not approval, nor a warning, just acknowledgement. Danielle took her place at the opposite end. "Before we begin," she said, sliding a folder onto the glossy wood surface, "I'd like to share some documents that clarify my position at Maxwell Innovations." She passed copies down both sides of the table: birth certificate, trust documentation, a notarized letter from Elaine Rivers, dated the year before her death, explaining everything. Whispers erupted. One board member removed his glasses. Another shifted uncomfortably. Danielle continued, voice calm but resolute. "For years, I worked my way through this company under the illusion that I was building something from scratch, that my success was merit alone. And while I take pride in my work, I've recently discovered that my connection to this company runs deeper. I am the daughter of Henry Maxwell and Elaine Rivers, and by the terms of her trust, I now own 48% of Maxwell Innovations." Silence. Then Henry spoke. "It's all true. I confirmed it myself." That statement detonated any lingering doubt. "What does this mean for leadership?" one director finally asked. "Are you calling for a vote of no confidence in the current structure?" Danielle took a breath. "No, not yet. I'm here to propose a new chapter, transparent, inclusive, and forward-facing. One that recognizes legacy but is not bound by it. I want to lead this company. Officially. Not because of my bloodline, but because I've earned it. And because I now have the equity to back that claim." Rachel slid a second document onto the table, a leadership proposal and governance restructuring plan. Some board members nodded slowly. Others remained stoic. Then, as if on cue, the opposition revealed itself. Thomas Greer, the CFO and one of Henry's oldest allies, stood. "Miss Rivers, let me be blunt. Legacy is not leadership, and emotional entanglements do not equal sound governance. We've spent decades building investor trust. Your sudden claim, no matter how valid, could destabilize everything." Danielle didn't flinch. Investor trust wasn't shaken when Lucas embezzled funds, was it? Or when board oversight allowed it to happen unchecked? Greer's jaw tightened. "This company doesn't need another ghost behind the curtain," she continued. "It needs light. And whether you like it or not, I have both the right and the resolve to be that light." A heated exchange followed, points and counterpoints. But Danielle had come prepared. She anticipated every question, answered every concern with poise. And slowly, momentum shifted. Then came the final vote. Of the 12 board members, 7 voted in favor of Danielle's proposed leadership structure. She had won. Later that evening, as she sat in her office, now officially CEO, Danielle found herself overwhelmed. Not with triumph, but with a quiet sorrow. She thought of her mother. Of late, nights have been filled with textbooks and instant noodles. Of whispered encouragements and sacrifices Danielle hadn't fully appreciated until now. A knock broke her reverie. Henry stood at the door, alone. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. He entered slowly, taking a seat across from her. "You were remarkable. Today," he said. Danielle stared at him. "You watched me work here for over a decade. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" Henry exhaled. "Because I was afraid of losing everything, and in the end, I lost it anyway." Danielle said nothing. He stood to leave. "You may hate me forever. I wouldn't blame you, but your mother would be proud." He paused, then added quietly, "So am I." As the door closed behind him, Danielle turned to the window once more. The city hadn't changed, but she had, and the future was finally hers to shape. Danielle Rivers had barely slept. Her first full day as CEO of Maxwell Innovations dawned with overcast skies, but her mind was a cyclone. There were victory emails to reply to, press statements to revise, and alliances to secure. But most pressing of all, she had inherited not just a company, but a battlefield littered with mines from past betrayals. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. The next morning, Danielle walked into the company's atrium, transformed into a press hall buzzing with cameras and journalists. A podium stood beneath the new banner, Maxwell Innovations, led by integrity. The world had questions. She had answers. As she stepped up to the mic, a dozen lenses focused on her face. She didn't blink. "I am Danielle Rivers," she began. "Until last week, I was the company's vice president of development. Today, I stand before you as CEO and as someone who, for years, unknowingly carried the legacy of a company that shaped the world and was shaped by secrets." She took a breath. "My story is not unique. It's the story of millions who work hard in silence, not knowing that truth and opportunity are withheld from them. I stand here not only to claim my place, but to ensure this company becomes a beacon of transparency, innovation, and justice." Applause erupted from employees lining the second-floor balcony. Journalists scribbled furiously. The press conference set the tone. The company was under new, unflinching leadership. But inside Maxwell Innovations, a darker reckoning had begun. Danielle initiated a full forensic audit. Rachel Kim and a new internal affairs team dug deep into records. What they found was a buried legacy of concealed deals, offshore transfers, and a second embezzlement scandal. Not by Lucas, but by Thomas Greer. Greer had been quietly funneling company funds into shell companies since 2017, using Lucas as a shield. Danielle's hands trembled as she read the report. Greer wasn't just resisting her leadership. He had been trying to sink the ship before she could steer it. She didn't hesitate. Danielle called an emergency executive session. Within 48 hours, Greer was fired, arrested, and publicly named in a legal complaint filed by Maxwell Innovations, and Danielle made it clear, no one, regardless of tenure or ties, was above accountability. 2 weeks later, Danielle received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a letter in delicate cursive. "Danielle, I never stopped watching over you. Henry and I made many mistakes, but I never regretted them. I left you the means to find your place, not just because you deserved it, but because the world deserved you in it. Love always, Mom." Attached was a small locket, her mother's. Danielle opened it, and inside was a photo, Elaine holding a baby, both smiling under a winter sun. Danielle held the locket close to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. That small weight was heavier than any crown she'd claimed. Henry requested a final meeting, not at the office, but at the old park where he and Elaine used to meet in secret. Danielle almost didn't go. but closure was its kind of justice. He was already seated on a bench when she arrived, looking older than she remembered. His eyes, tired, remorseful, searched hers for forgiveness. "I never stopped loving her," he said. "But I was a coward, and in trying to preserve my empire, I destroyed the only family I had left." Danielle sat beside him in silence. She didn't offer comfort, but she didn't walk away. "You still have a choice," she finally said. "Not to fix the past, but to support the future." He nodded slowly. "What do you need from me? Testify against Greer." Henry flinched. "You knew what he was doing? You didn't act. If you want redemption, this is how." And he agreed. 6 months later, Maxwell Innovations was reborn. The company went public under Danielle's leadership, attracting new investors drawn to its reputation for ethical tech. The board now included 2 women and a former whistleblower from another firm, Danielle's doing. The headquarters had a new plaque installed in the lobby, founded in secrecy, reclaimed with truth. Danielle Rivers stood before it during the unveiling, surrounded by staff, reporters, and investors. Rachel stood beside her, beaming. "You did it." "No," Danielle said. "We did it. And now, we build something better." Years later, Danielle would walk through those same doors as a guest speaker, no longer CEO, having passed the torch. She told the new hires the truth. Inheritance isn't about blood. It's about courage, the courage to demand your worth, to challenge broken systems, and to rewrite the script even if you weren't handed the pen. And as she looked out at the next generation, Danielle knew the trap had never been the inheritance. It had been the silence, and she had broken it forever.